Diarna actually began in Morocco with a friend of ours who has roots in southern Morocco and who had just had a daughter and just gotten back from going to Morocco. He was very concerned about how his daughter was going to connect to Jewish heritage as she grew up. She just celebrated her bat mitzvah recently, so that gives you some idea of how long we've been doing this. And originally, we were presenting on two different laptops. We had one laptop where we would have the photographs, and we had another laptop where we would show the Google Earth. And the idea was to put these sites on the map to enable people to see the synagogues, the cemeteries, the schools, the shrines, and to create a data layer of archival and contemporary photographs and video, oral history, testimony, 360 panoramas, 3D models, really any media that we could bring to bear to make these sites accessible. And as I mentioned last night, Professor Boom and I served on a panel at the Association of Jewish Studies. And there was a very memorable question, which is relevant for this panel. An Israeli academic got up at the end of our presentation and said, "Don't tell me your project is historical. Everything in the Middle East is political. And what do you do if a site has graffiti?" And at first, I didn't understand what she was asking, so maybe a little incredulously, I said, is the graffiti there? And what she was getting at is that the site, if it has graffiti, we shouldn't show it necessarily because it might offend someone. And so I said, and I responded with why Diarna, I believe Diarna is a historical project and interested in creating this data layer, is we put these sites on the map. We leave the contextualization to other people. We heard about the different testimonies of, narratives on why the Jews are not in a particular place, and we're very careful to avoid engaging in any of the politics of this situation. We're saying simply the site is there, there was a Jewish community there, and we're interested in anyone's impressions of what that site was. So if a site has graffiti on it today, and my example was the Magen Avraham Synagogue of Beirut, we have wonderful photos of it from the 1950s when it was the centerpiece of the Wadi Abu Jamil neighborhood. We have pictures of it from the 1970s when, much like the rest of Beirut, it was destroyed. And we've got pictures of when it was used by the Amal militia as a base of operations. And now we have pictures of it when it's been fully restored, even with the endorsement of Hezbollah. So I said to her, which part of the history should we leave out? We present everything. And so I think it's very important to just remember the sites are there. And we were familiar with the blogger who was mentioned. She actually presented here. And maybe we'll get to what I said in response to her at some other point. But now we're going to dive into Jewish Morocco and some of the sites that Josh, our intrepid Indiana Jones, has been on the ground and documented these places, has visited.
So at the most basic layer, we're putting data on a map. So each one of these pins represents data, and we're going to jump into it. And Josh is going to tell us a little bit of the story behind the photos that we're going to see on screen. So let's delve in.
Okay.
So where are we going?
Nowhere yet.
Nowhere yet.
You can start there.
All right, so we're going to Ephraim.
So like Jason said, I've been doing this for Diarna for 11 years, but I've been mapping and photographing Jewish heritage sites for 14. The first time was in Egypt in 2005. And so today I'll just share kind of more of an experiential perspective on what it was like to go to Morocco. I've been there 4 times in the time I've been doing this for Diarna, and I'll share a couple of experiences from some of those trips. For starters, I should say that I've never been arrested, detained, delayed by government agencies, or spied upon, to my knowledge, on these trips, which is actually more than I can say.
In Morocco.
In Morocco, which is more than I can say.
In Egypt once.
It's more than I can say for some of the other places I've visited. So the first site we can talk about is Ephraim in the Anti-Atlas Mountains. And on one of my first research trips, a colleague and I were in search of a 2,000-year-old cemetery in the south of Morocco, in a village called Ifren in the Anti-Atlas Mountains. So we basically showed up. We knew there was a cemetery there. We hadn't made contact with anyone. We arrived and we couldn't find any evidence of a synagogue or a cemetery. So we just asked the first people we encountered, and it happened to be a bunch of boys about 12, 13 years old. And they sort of said, yeah. And one got in the car with us. The rest took off at a right angle to the road into the wilderness, and we followed them as far as we could in the car till we got to a dry riverbed. We got out of the car and we started following them into the mountains of 15, 20 minutes. And I'm wondering, what's going on? Where are we going? And then I started to see wax on some of the rocks by the trail. And it was just a good sign that candles had been lit for memorial, candles had been lit. And then I saw a small structure on the horizon. It turned out to be a purification room, another good sign that maybe, in fact, there was a cemetery here. And then we just ended up, I see you're looking at these pictures, just kind of a rock field in the middle of the mountains. And I'm looking to the boys to tell me, where's the cemetery? And they're motioning to me as they're turning over rocks to do the same. And, we started to turn over rocks and found, epitaphs kind of roughly chiseled into some of these rocks. And there were rocks scattered everywhere, headstones scattered everywhere. There were some semblances of what were maybe sarcophagi and graves that had, also been scattered. But as all of this was happening, it just dawned on me that these boys had kind of an intergenerational, institutional knowledge of the Jews that had lived in the village and the Jews of Morocco. And we were relying on them for our research and our work, and they were an invaluable part of this process. They started asking a lot of questions. I didn't know exactly what they had been told, but they certainly knew that there was a Jewish cemetery there. And then they later led us to the synagogue. And for me, it was a meaningful experience to know that this memory isn't fully extinguished. There's still something to be gleaned from the residents in these places. And I continue to have that kind of experience over and over in Morocco. No matter where we go, we're typically relying on a local Muslim resident who was, charged with maintaining the synagogue, holding the key to the synagogue, looking after the cemetery. And these are the people that we continually come into contact with and are giving us information, giving us background. And invariably in all of these experiences, the people that we encounter are generous with their information, very welcoming. Of course, I've had more glasses of tea in synagogues than I can recount, delicious mint tea. And in some cases, full meals, prepared for us at a moment's notice. So the warmth and generosity and openness it's something that I experienced, distinctive to Morocco, really, in my travels around in the Maghreb and in the Middle East.
Let's jump to Risani.
You want us to switch?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about satellite imagery is that you're truly able to see what it looks like. And so as we're zooming in here on the village of Risani, I want to ask any urban planners in the audience. Anybody do urban planning? Okay, so I'll take that as a yes for everybody. Everybody's just too embarrassed to say that. They don't want to stand out. But what does the middle of the screen look like with the little icon in it? Does that look like a well laid out Western type city, or does the thing around it look more Western? So the middle, the thing that just basically looks like a jigsaw piece, that's a mellah. Because as we know, they're really just a little bit of alleyways and small little streets and covered souks, and that really just connect everything. But when you look at it from the satellite imagery, you're able to see, oh wow, it really is something I have no concept of living in America. It's really something extremely foreign to me. But when you look at it from the satellite imagery, and then you hear the stories of it, and you hear the stories of how people would run from roof to roof, or they would actually go underground from house to house, and you're able to put the pictures with it. You're able to actually visualize and transport yourself to these locales. So let's transport ourselves to Risani and to the home of the Baba Saleh.
So a wonderful occurrence, which we find it again and again in Morocco, is this tradition of Muslim caretakers of Jewish shrines and cemeteries. And in the case of Risani, there's a story that's told that when the Baba Saleh, who's the grandson of the Abir Yaakov, who's buried in Damanhur, Egypt, the Baba Saleh left for Israel, he sold his home to a Muslim family. And the woman who bought the home, her son became deathly ill. And according to her telling, the Baba Saleh came to her in a dream and said, if you open up my home to pilgrims, your son will recover. And the home is open to pilgrims, so I presume he recovered. Again and again, these kinds of stories are important in and of themselves. I should also say, we've preserved many shrines and here and elsewhere. Josh and I were presenting in front of an Iraqi audience, and they asked Iraqi synagogue in Queens, the Bnei Naharaim, and they said, do you have the tomb of Daniel in Kirkuk? And I said, yes, we have documented that, but we also have the tomb of Daniel in Shushan, Iran, so you'll have to decide with the Persians which one to venerate. But we're interested in the history of the site itself and telling the story as it is. And sometimes there's stories of great cooperation, sometimes there's stories of difficult times that happened there. We don't shy away from anything, and that's what I think is important about Diarna, is we document all the sites, and we make all the documentation available. We're not deciding, okay, we're not going to show this picture because somebody might not like it, or we're not going to have this testimony because somebody might not like it. We show everything.
So let's jump to something that gets a lot of people interested.
Yeah, I think we've already talked, heard a little bit about the Vichy camps, and again, I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian, I'm coming from a purely experiential perspective here. But I wanted to address this story of the Vichy camps because it played a part in another experience I had. It was like the first night of my third trip to Morocco in 2009. There was a small dinner organized to welcome our team, and at the dinner someone asked me where in the country we plan to travel. When I mentioned the Vichy camps, they immediately launched into this story about how when the Vichy approached the king and instructed him to collect the Jews into these camps and make them wear a yellow Star of David, the king replied that the Jews are like any of his citizens, they're going to be protected. He won't collect them, and if they're forced to wear stars, then everyone will wear stars in solidarity. Everyone will be Jews. And I was taken aback at this story. It was like kind of this amazing story, and no sooner had I turned to the next person and wanted to share it and told them what I just heard, they said, yeah, you got to learn to differentiate fact from legend. And okay, so here I am. So I didn't know what was true, and I think somewhere in there is truth, and it needs to be researched. But I'm more interested in the spirit of the story and the fact that people get excited to tell it and are eager to tell it because it reflects an attitude that admires and aspires to openness, appreciation of, and identification with the other. And that's no small thing. And it's not something I encounter a lot in these travels. So, and I think, there aren't really any other kings in North Africa or about whom stories like this are told, and it's something to be noted. And I think the evidence that this attitude persists is manifest in, for example, Muhammad VI's decree to protect all cemeteries, including Jewish ones, with the wall. and where we work closely with the Mumuna Association, that organizations like this are coming out of Morocco is an important thing to us.
So Tendrara is the kind of the more modern camp. I mean, it looks like a Western camp if you take a look at it, with the train tracks and with the structures and the barracks. We understand from scholars apparently this barracks were for the guards, not for the inmates. Right. And some of the other camps that we have documented that Alma visited when she was in Morocco are much less sophisticated. One camp in particular, Fom Tefila, was a discipline camp and was known for particularly horrific torture, which was that people would dig a tomb, and during the day they would be outside exposed to the elements. At night they'd be exposed to the elements. But also to follow up on Professor Khabib's point, our understanding is that there were, oddly enough, these Polish Ashkenazi Jews who ended up in the middle of nowhere in these camps, and Moroccan Jews were not targeted for these camps. Perhaps some Moroccan Jews as political dissidents ended up being in these camps, but they weren't targeted for being Jews.
And how are we doing
Yeah.
on time?
That's all I have.
We still have time. Oh, great. So we have one more. So let's go to Amzruman.
Mm-hmm. So another part, and we heard from Professor Shatrit this morning, was how people remember Jewish language and remember Jewish prayers. So in one of Josh's expeditions to this town, Amzru, and there's a beautiful synagogue with a skylight, these wonderful photos from Josh.
I don't know if it was a skylight or just a hole in the ceiling.
I think it was a skylight, but
It's dramatic.
There was an artisan in town who remembered the Jewish prayers, even though the Jews have been gone from Amzru for 3, 4, 5 decades. So we're going to play a clip of him, hopefully.
Give me a second. It's a lot of pictures here.
It's this man, right there.
You can see the Amazigh art. Get the sense of the Mela. The synagogue was truly a towering space. We see little book cubbies.
But the door, go back one, the door is like 4'10". I mean, I'm 5'7". I was bending way down to get in.
And then the ceiling, the wall is just tremendous. And walk into the Mela. Again, so these are something that, as a Westerner, as a New York City person, if I can't fit 2-car widths, it's not a street. little too much New York in me.
There we go. Okay. So hopefully we can hear it.
You're not going to be able to hear it.
Oh, no.
Let's see if it works.
وعندهم كلمات يقولوهم كيف تقول لك باروخ شمال باروخ حطا دوله الى ملك اسرائيل تقول لك الله يحميك من الحيله باش خذ لك درسين وعكادوس باروخ وبارعه وحبيب بن مراد وعنطره بن صامتو العفل الكبير يحمي لك من الحيله اولياء النبي في الركينه.
Did anybody hear that?
Yeah?
That's
Good.
not the only caretaker, at least I encountered, that recited prayers for us. I mean, Harim in Arazan did. A couple of other people did as well.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
know
you have a question right there. Sure.
I do have a question. I went on the site and I noticed that there were also icons for Hassan II Mosque and Volubilis and Hadu and Wurzazat and these other non-Jewish historical places. So is the Diarna project limited to just Jewish sites?
It's Jewish sites, but it also sites that are not necessarily Jewish or that are not obviously Jewish but have a Jewish connection. So for instance, we've documented non-Jewish structures that were designed by Jewish architects. There's a mosque in Cairo and other sites, the Bangladeshi parliament and other sites that we've documented in the past. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a follow-up question.
I have a question. I heard that you documented sites in Iraq.
Yes.
And did you document the alleged tomb of Yehezkiel.
Absolutely.
I'm asking the question.
In Al-Kifl.
I just read 2 days ago that apparently Iraqis are destroying some of the sites, and especially the site of Yehezkiel and Aviv.
So we get these questions all the time. Are sites destroyed? Are they not destroyed? We have a relationship with the State Department, so we actually get very good satellite imagery, and we're able to check if a site, for instance, sites in Syria that are caught in the midst of the war, are they in good shape? Or in Libya, we've also had this question. In the case of the tomb in Al-Kifl, we've had this question over many, many years. In the past, when we've checked with our contacts, we've been told that there are renovations that have happened, but that most of the damage had actually been done during the Saddam era and wasn't discovered until more recently. As far as we know, and this is like as of last week, there was no change in the status quo on of the Hebrew inscriptions that are still there. But I haven't seen the article from 2 days ago, so I don't know. We can check again. And in the case of Iraqi Kurdistan, the purported tomb of Nahum, there's actually a project to restore that shrine that's going on right now.
Yes.
How has your funding been sourced? How has the funding changed over the years that have allowed you to do this work?
So interestingly, people always presume that the Iraqi Jewish community or the Moroccan Jewish community, it's actually been a series of German Jews or German Jewish foundations that have always supported Diarna. And Diarna overwhelmingly has been a volunteer project. So the biggest source of funding is Josh for going on these expeditions, volunteering his time, volunteering his talent, and many other people who have worked for now over a decade on the ground, young Berbers, young Persians, young Arabs who have helped us to preserve these sites. That's the biggest source of funding. Yes?
One last question here.
In addition to major grants that support some student volunteers, so UC Santa Cruz, for example,
Exactly.
Jewish Studies supports interns to work in Diarna for the summers, and that's through the Koret Foundation specifically.
Yes, and I should also say we have a relationship with Wellesley College. Professor Fran Molino, who's the co-founder of Diarna and the board president of the organization oversees Diarna, have an excellent relationship with Wellesley. So for a long time, our highest paid workers were Wellesley interns, to give you a sense of the project.
One last short question.
Okay. Yes, I was interested in your comment about how you found them, that it was a difference of the narrative of the old men who knew how to sing it and they knew themselves, as opposed to the 12-year-old boys that had heard about this and found this that didn't have any direct contact. Did you have, who helped you? How did you see a difference in how they helped you or related to your project on the ground?
Between the boys and whom?
The older men.
No, typically wherever we go, we're received really well and warmly. And there's, no hesitation to cooperate and help us. The boys was, in some cases, we know who a caretaker is, and especially in Morocco, we work closely with Rafi Al-Maleh, the only Jewish tour guide in Morocco that we know of anyway, who did a doctorate on the genizot of a lot of these synagogues. So he is in touch with and started to get to know a lot of the caretakers themselves. So he put us in touch with caretakers that he knew. In the case of the boys, we just had to go. He didn't know anyone there, I guess, and or the person wasn't in town. So that was sort of a unique case.
Thank you. I kind of have to stop because it's lunchtime. One small remark. I was myself in Isan in 1964, and we were in the Mela, and all the doors were locked, and we had planks all over the doors. We asked how come. He said, the Sheikh said, we keep the houses of the Jews, so when the Jews come back, they find their houses.